Hello, everyone. Welcome to AMAZE Live. I'm your host, Christine Coe, and I am on the line with the luminous Quiana Agbai. Hi.
Good morning.
I'm so grateful for you for coming on, even though I know you're busy. It's like end of the school year, dumpster fire, and everything else. So I really appreciate you prioritizing sex ed. That's awesome.
Definitely.
So you and I are both in Boston, which is fabulous, although we don't even see each other that much, which is like ridiculous. Sometimes we have to like go to different parts of the country to see each other, which is also ridiculous. But I would just love, I had the idea to bring you on a while ago, and then I was reminded about it when I actually saw you at a Planned Parenthood event way back in December. And then I think I thought about it again when I saw you at Mom in May. So we're finally making it happen, which is amazing. And so, at AMAZE Parents, we have a bunch of Facebook Live conversations. A lot of them are with sexual health educators. And then we also love mixing in parent voices because we are the front line, right?
Right.
So I would love for you to, while we're waiting for people, people are joining and stuff, to just introduce yourself a little bit, your ages of your kids, kind of like you could tell us about your website, all that, any of that good stuff.
Great. I'm Quiana Agbai, mom to Grayson, who is about to be 5 on June 27th. And then my daughter, Virginia, her nickname is Nia. She will be 9 in August. So I have 2
Oh my gosh.
babies. So we're excited about summer birthdays and all of that goodness. But living in Boston, it was actually a return to Boston for us. My husband and I met here 20 years ago this fall, which is wild. And so we returned here at the end of 2016 with our kids in tow. And so it's been a real shift thinking of Boston as the place we got our education, but now to be back here with kids, it's been really interesting and kind of like relearning the city. So I started my family in Harlem. My blog is Harlem Lovebirds. We lived in New Hampshire for 2 years and then made it here to Boston back to Boston in 2016. But although my blog is Harlem Lovebirds, Boston Lovebirds just didn't quite have the same.
Yeah, I know, I get it.
I kept Harlem Lovebirds. I still return to New York City. I have lots of family there. My sisters are in New York City. One's still in Harlem. And then originally we're from Columbus, Ohio. And my husband's family is from Brooklyn. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Still along the lines of urban parenting at Harlem Lovebirds. And it's the blog has taken me so many wonderful places, some of the conferences that you mentioned, but it's been a really great opportunity to do things like this and to speak and consult. And blogging has really opened up a lot of doors.
It has. And it's just, it brings us all closer. And I agree with you. Even as someone who's partial to Boston, I think Harlem Lovebirds definitely keep the branding going. I'm into it. Your kids, almost 5 and 9, you're in the zone, right? With, lots of questions. And I really I'm so curious, because at AMAZE, we have our experts and everything and other parents who weigh in on what kids are asking. But I'm always curious, just on a parent-to-parent level, to find out what other kids are asking about. So, what are some of your kids' most common questions related to their bodies or privacy? I'm just curious to hear about those.
Yeah, well, starting with my son, he's the most interesting because he's the most humorous of 5-year-olds. So everything right now is related to bathroom humor. So, farting and burping. And so for him, everything is very biological, asking those types of questions about if I eat this, will I grow? My husband is 6'8". He's a pretty big guy. So I think my son, he's starting to understand I'm going to be big like daddy probably. And so he's always asking questions about growing, about muscles, about bones, about questions. He reflects back a lot about what he was like as a baby growing in my womb. So he's starting to figure out his place. And also he's as an early developer, he got his teeth early, which means they're falling out early. So he's starting to notice, I'm taller than a lot of the other kids in my preschool. I've lost the most teeth. He's lost like 6 teeth.
Wow.
And so the other children are noticing that he's advanced. And so it's making him ask a lot of physical questions about his development. So that's like, I call that the easy stuff, because it's how we can like pull out a picture book and talk about nutrition and those types of things. My daughter, almost being 9, that's where the challenge is. And I think, I'm a product of single sex education going back to like 8th grade all the way to college. And I think there's something to be said about growing up in such a empowered feminist educational system. It's really impacted how I interact with my daughter on these questions. So I don't shy away when she's asking about her stages. So she'll say, "Mommy, am I in stage 3?" And so she's like very—
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Yes. And so because, she's in the 3rd grade, she reads at a 7th grade level. And so I have to keep that in mind, but also understand that she's a little girl. So she's still playing with dolls and still doing those types of things. But she's also asking real questions because she too is advanced. She sees her breast development. She sees—
so she's early developing as well. Or
yes.
Okay.
She's asking. Go ahead.
No, my other question, when she said stage 2, I was like, whoa, that's really a bit, is it also because like you guys have sex ed books like Roby Harris or whatever, and she's perusing those, or is it from your conversations with her that she just has a more mature like knowledge of the terminology and that sort of thing? Where is that coming from?
Well, knowing that she's a reader, I did make age appropriate books available to her. So I think American Girl has like a series of books that they run. And so I got an age appropriate book for her that she can read on her own. Yeah. And so she sleeps with the book. And she asks me questions when she's ready. She'll come to me and say, "Mommy, do you think it's time that I keep, some sanitary napkins in my backpack?" And I'm like, wow, this is like, she's so forward about it and methodical. And then I also, on the other hand, as much as I may be surprised internally or whatever, I physically see how she's developing faster in the same way my son is developing faster than his peers. And so I make sure that I check my face with my emotional response.
Good tip. Pro tip, check the face.
And I make sure that it's just like, this is a normal conversation. We talk about things very regularly. She knows, she knows Mommy has a period. One of the more interesting things, and I didn't get that she had missed this in her own reading, was she must have heard me mention something about being on my period. And she said, "But why would you be on your period? You've had your children.
Oh, yeah.
You had my brother, you've had me. Why would you still be having a period?" And I was like, oh my goodness, the end, this is something that's going to go, all the way through all of these decades. This is what's ahead. And then I realized, oh yes, in our conversations, I missed that piece of like the longevity of it. And I could just see it in her face, like, wow, this is what I have to look ahead to. And so I think there's been those very rational moments of, yes, we're reading a book, we're talking about these things, we're setting up, little packets in her backpack so she's prepared, but also realizing when there's information that I've missed or there's gaps, being able to roll with the punches. So she definitely keeps me on my toes. She asks a lot of questions. And I think also in her peer group, sometimes we talk about the things that they bring up and kind of what are the hot topics, and not in a gossipy way, but kind of like, what are the concerns that are going on amongst your friends right now? Do those concern you? Sometimes she's the one with the answers in her peer group. But I think right now the focus on the physical changes for both of my children, they're both very aware of the changes that they're going through as early developers.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the biggest things, because the runway, the variability is so crazy, right? So your son is 4 and already losing 6 teeth or whatever. And my youngest is 8 and has not lost a tooth yet. Like, I'm not stressed about it because, my husband and I were late developers. Like, I know that both of my girls are late and I'm like, that's fine, whatever. But it is interesting because it's just such a such a big window of variability for kids and their bodies. Now, have you been dealing with any emotional stuff yet, or?
Yes, we're going through a lot of emotional things, and I think we have a great pediatrician. They're new to us. We just switched out maybe, I don't know, 3 months ago. And I find that they're very holistic. They do have a behavioral therapy department there in-house, which is really great. And so my daughter, I mean, just being as self-aware as she is, said she did want to go to see the therapist. And that's something she had done because we moved a lot over the years, even just within the East Coast. But I mean, she's in her 6th school, and she's
oh, wow.
That's a lot of change. And so I wanted to proactively manage that emotional piece from all of the geographical changes that she's had, keeping in mind that as an early developer, even looking at the fact, I mean, they had her go in and get a bone scan, even because, for precocious puberty, we were wondering, what's going on there? So I think not in an alarming kind of way, but just keeping that dialogue open, knowing that there is a mental health component. She is having a lot of emotions and things that she's going through. We do a lot of check-ins with each other. She's a writer, so that's a strategy that works really well for her. So every morning she's up before her alarm, usually around 6 a.m., and she's writing like pretty much every morning. That's what she's doing.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Outlet. And then for my son, on the other hand, emotionally, he's really starting to figure out his autonomy and push boundaries. So we do get a lot of the tantrums, I think more so now than ever when he was 2 or 3, but I can understand what's happening with his development. And he's pretty easy to pull back around with humor, bathroom humor.
Always.
It's pretty easy to circle him back around. And 2, with their age difference, about 4 years apart, they feed off of each other's energy. So we do a lot with our therapist as far as breathing and coping and things that they can do with each other to kind of redirect some of those emotions. It's a lot of work. Like it's
a ton of work. It's a ton of work.
This because of the emotional, the physical, all of that. And even for myself, making sure I'm checking in with my therapist, there's that piece as well, because you just sometimes need that objective third-party gut check
for sure
about all these things that you're balancing in the role of motherhood and educator.
Well,
so educator.
This leads me to a question. So I would just loosely venture to say that on the scale of parents and their ability to give their kids information, you guys are probably like quite high on the scale of that, and the reality is, this is like a challenging time. There are so many issues, so many things in the media. It's like, it's a little bit daunting as a parent, whether it's, the Me Too, or it's, consent, or there's so many things, right? And so I'm curious, even though you are on the side of like being really open and honest, incredibly open and honest with those conversations, how are there conversations or topics that you're nervous about having with them, like that have been a bit of a struggle, or you're just anticipating being like, oh man, I really don't want to talk about that?
Yeah, we have the book. What is it? It's Not the Stork. So we have that book, and kind of my husband and I, because we coming from 2 completely different backgrounds of what was talked about, what wasn't talked about. That's one of the areas that we've struggled with. So the children, and we've had other books. I forgot one of them was very abstract, but it talked about the seed and very much in and I can get the title afterwards. But the children found the book on their own. Well, my husband and I were trying to like read all the books. Like we had our stack of like, okay, we like this piece, we like that part, maybe we can put something together. No, the kids bypassed it, found the book, read it to each other. Like they gave themselves like their own sex ed. And it's like, we're not gonna wait for you. And they were so into this book. Didn't ask us any questions. I don't think I was home at the time when my son found it, and he was just like, "Oh, big sister, will you read this to me?" And they just like read it together like it was like normal, and they kept revisiting the book to talk about it in their own little like I don't know, conference.
Yes.
And it was really interesting to watch that. And it was a very abstract book, so it wasn't very graphic. It was talking about kind of more in an artistic visual way of, this comes from here and this comes from here and it forms. And it was a very beautiful book, but I was totally shocked that the kids kind of took that piece and like owned it. But from a more technical perspective, we have not had those conversations with the children. And I think that's something for this summer is top priority, especially because one of the requests we get from both of the children is for more siblings. So there is like a really real need to talk about this because they're asking, they're like, forget a puppy, forget a cat. It's like, where's the rest?
More humans, why not?
Where's the rest of the children? Like, come on.
Oh my goodness. I think you need to make hashtag sex ed story time a thing. Like that's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, that's really, really interesting. One question I had for you, and if you would rather not answer, I understand, but you mentioned, one thing that we find a lot of parents kind of get stuck in is gendered sex ed. So like, the dad needs to talk to the boy, assuming they're two, there's a male and a female. So the dad needs to talk to the son and the mom needs to talk to the daughter. And, how do you guys, you had mentioned that your husband, you guys grew up with different sort of amounts of information. I'm just assuming that means like maybe you had a more progressive sort of conversational upbringing and maybe he didn't as much. I don't know. But, how has that played out with parenting? Is he ready to take on those conversations with your kids?
Yes. And I think for him, especially in the wake of the Me Too movement, for him and I think growing up, both of us in really religious homes, I think that's a piece that kind of, that filter was really how sex ed was spoken about. And so he and I are on the same page that we don't necessarily want to go that same route. We can appreciate it. But I think in the current situation, you can't parent how you were parented because you're all the time because you're being raised in a different time. So I think it's very easy, to think, well, I was raised this way, or that was that time. Like we are here. It's a world of Me Too. It's a world of social media. And I think we're very cognizant of that and being respectful of how our parents educated and raised us, but understanding that there is some notion that we need to adapt for our children. So my husband especially wants to be involved with the conversation with my daughter. And I think for me, even beyond sex ed, just the gender differences and the stereotypical roles and responsibilities, we've both been very clear that we want to model for our children that we're capable of things that you would typically think of masculine or feminine. That yes, daddy can cook and clean, and mommy can do it too, and we interchange. And so we model that. And my husband really wanting to, I guess you call it school, my daughter, because he understands that there's a level of needing that influence from him as a man, and that perspective for her to understand that her father is comfortable with talking about those things and not just relegating it to me, but also being able to talk to my son when the time comes, especially on understanding how to treat and respect girls and women. And I think, there's that piece, sometimes when I look at the Me Too movement and things that are going on right now across the country, I'm like, who was raising these men?
I know.
And I think it's a balance of not only the community, the parents, whatever family is around, but in your peer group, there's so much that just, as much as my husband and I want to, educate our kids and be there for our kids, we also understand the variable of what's happening in the school environment and how that comes to play. But we're both very active and committed to sex ed, body education, and the mental health component, and making sure that
Wonderful.
we're comfortable talking to all those things with both of our children.
That's fabulous. All right. Well, I just have two quick questions I want to, before we go. And one of them is like, obviously you are super leveled up on the communicative situation with your kids, but I would love for you to kind of like mentally roll it back and think back to like, basically I'm looking for like one of your favorite pro communication tips to like help if, parents are tuning in and they are like, oh my gosh, like I haven't even started. Like, how do I start? Well, what would be one of your like top recommendations for parents who are really scared and like legitimately, as you said, our generation, like our parents, there was so much, for many of us, there was so little conversation. So people aren't growing up with a ton of experience. Like what would be a sort of, pro tip from you for how to get started with some of these tough conversations?
Yeah, I would say to scale it down, because a lot of times when you're left in your mind, imagining what your children may be thinking of or experiencing, a lot of times as a parent, in your mind, it's a lot more complicated than how your child is actually framing it. So I think however deep you may be thinking about a topic, even if I think of my daughter and what's happening as she's going through puberty, I may be having this deep, in the weeds thought of how I perceive she's experiencing it, but oftentimes it's very high level for the child. And I think if there's that check-in, either if it's like how I said, my daughter likes to write, does she write me questions and I answer them back written? If that works for your family, that could be an option. If in a letter answer kind of way, but also having the conversations just to ask, what do you think about this? I'm very just open with my daughter to ask those questions. I see you have hair there. How does that make you feel? What do you think about that? And so sometimes I just leave those questions very open for her just to gauge how she's processing it. Sometimes it's like, no big deal. For example, I remember, the push to shave your legs, fourth, fifth grade. And I remember thinking like, oh, it never occurred to me to ask for a razor. Or, it was almost like my mom had to come to me and was like, are you curious about this? And I was like, not really. Like, I really don't care. It wasn't until someone else noticed how hairy I was. Oh boy.
Right.
And I was kind of like, oh, okay, maybe I should consider, but whatever. I'm just not into it. But I remember like for all my peers, that was priority. And so I think checking in with your children and sometimes not just going forward with whatever plan script you have in your mind, but letting them speak first.
Yes.
You ask those questions to your child first. And even for my 5-year-old son, you've lost 6 teeth. What does that feel like? What do you think about that?
Yep. And
I think from there you can kind of gauge some of the things that might be worrying or concerning them, things that they may be proud of. I think especially when you have children that are really developed or children who are really tall for their age, sometimes they're perceived as older than they are.
Yes, which is a challenge. Yeah.
And I'm very aware of that. And for my children, and so I'm always checking in with them to see if do they feel forced to level up, or rise to the occasion, even though they're both the youngest in their classes, they're the biggest kids. What does that feel like? And so I always want to be asking them and checking in with them. They probably think I ask too many questions, but I love to leave them open-ended. And also, like I said, to check my face sometimes. I'm not, have that look of worry or concern. And maybe just to start there, asking your children those types of questions that let you kind of gauge, where they're at.
I think that's wonderful. All right. Well, my last question before we go is you mentioned, and if you can't think of titles right at the top of your head, you can send them to me later and I'll add them to the comment thread. But you had mentioned the American Girl books, which I'm familiar with that. And then It's Not the Stork. And I was wondering if there are any other resources that have been super helpful with your kids, whether, kids consume things differently. So for some kids, books work, other kids, videos work. It kind of runs the gamut. So I didn't know if there were any others that you wanted to share with our community. There
is a book, It's Hard Being 5. I think right now with the 5th birthday approaching, we've been revisiting that book a lot for my son because we are noticing now a lot stronger emotions coming forward. And so, looking at locus of control and processing and all of that, we read that book a lot with him because I definitely notice a shift as kindergarten approaches. And that book has been really helpful for us right now. But It's Not the Stork, it's fantastic. And the American Girl series. Those we're pretty much focused around those books right now.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, Quiana, I can't thank you enough. It was such a delight to see your face. I hope we see each other in person soon. And thank you so much for imparting your wisdom. And I hope actually people feel your energy and feel like brave, because we can do it. We can do hard things and we can have these conversations, and they don't have to be as hard as they kind of get up in here, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, take care, and we'll see you next time, guys.